Okay, good evening. Shall we start? Good evening, welcome. My name is Simon Pirani. This is the third in this series of discussions about the Russian Revolution. They're taking place usually on the last Thursday of each month. We're early this month for obvious reasons. Over the next year, and this is obviously linked with the centenary of the revolution in 2017. Before we start, we're videoing at the back and sound recording the talks, and that's to make these recordings available to a wider audience on YouTube. So if you enjoy this, tell all your friends to watch it on YouTube. The camera is only pointing up here, so only Andy and I will be visible. And I think during the questions and discussion we'll only be sound recording. Secondly, please, if you can't bear to turn off your phones, put them on silent. Because there are some people here who weren't at the previous talks, you're very welcome. I'll just say a few words about the series and the way that we're doing it. First, the talks are named The Social Histories of the Russian Revolution, and that means we're discussing how the revolution was experienced by the mass of working people, women and men, who participated in it. We do not intend to brush aside or ignore the role of political leaders and their disputes and discussions and decisions, but we hope to move beyond the debates on those subjects, which are comparatively well known, to think about how millions of people participated in changing history, which in fact is one way that you could define what a revolution is. Secondly, the talks are not academic seminars in the usual sense. What we have been trying to do and are trying to do with the program, and so far we've been successful, is to bring together university-based historians who've spent many years studying the revolution with a wider audience, with people who probably, that's certainly the case of the organisers, are interested in this because they're interested in social change, in making the world a different place, getting past capitalism. So we want to create a space where there can be a discussion between those historians who actually know a lot about this and people who are interested in it but are not necessarily in a university. We want to try to do this in such a way that you feel able to participate, however much or little you know about the subject. So if you're sitting there and a question comes into your mind and you have that feeling which we all experience, this one's really going to sound stupid to some people here, but don't just say it, please, and ask or make your point in the discussion part of the meeting. The organising group are friends who've been active in social movements and labour movements and are interested in ideas about changing the world, particularly communist ideas. That's why we started the series. And although some of us work in or have worked in universities, we're not doing this as part of our job. So we see this as part of our broader activity, and we'll run the meeting in that way. So what's going to happen this evening? Andy will speak for around half an hour. We'll then have at least another hour for questions, discussion, for your comments and for his further comments. As chair, I intend to prioritise people who haven't participated in discussions like this before. So, like I said, don't hesitate to ask or to make your point. Another point is that many left-wing meetings and events tend to be completely dominated by men talking rather than women, and we're keen to make this a space where that doesn't happen, so please help us with that. And at the end, we'll take a few minutes, as is traditional in labour and social movements, for anyone to announce any relevant meeting, demonstration, anything you want to draw our attention to. And after that, following another very well-established tradition, we will go to the Institute of Education bar, which is nice and spacious and would certainly have room for all who want to join us and carry on discussing this or anything else. Right, the speaker and the topic. Andy Willimott is a lecturer in modern Russian and Soviet history at the University of Reading. He's also lectured at UCL at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies here in London. He is author of Living the Revolution, Urban Communes and Soviet Socialism, which was published this year by Oxford University Press, and he's co-author of another book that's coming out next year, Rethinking the Russian Revolution as Historical Divide. So we're very pleased to welcome him. His title is Living the Revolution, Urban Communes in 1920s Russia and the Invention of a Socialist Lifestyle. And Andy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Yep. Sorry if you can't see me. I found this ridiculous screen, I can't get out of the way. First of all, I'd like to thank Simon, William and Brendan for organising this series and inviting me to be part of it. It promises to be something very intriguing over the next year or so. So today I want to talk about living the revolution. I want to talk about urban communes, the people that formed them, and the desire to fashion a socialist lifestyle after 1917. I want to introduce you to these people. I want to introduce you to those people, those fiery-eyed, bed-headed people behind me here that attempted to build these communes. More on this group in a moment, but just for now, note the chap here, second from my left, in the leather jacket, sporting the traditional, the trendy outfit of the revolutionary period, a leather jacket. So watch out on the hipsters in Shoreditch. So who are they? They are young activists, revolutionary wannabes, who made up the Mokrinsky Lane commune, a group that occupied an apartment situated above a laundry in the Kitai-Gorod region of Moscow, where they tried to enact a collectivist lifestyle. A collectivist lifestyle in keeping with their understanding of this thing called socialism that had been thrust upon them. What are they doing? These were but some of the young hopefuls who declared the formation of an urban household commune, that is, revolutionary examples of socialist living, inside whatever dormitories or lodgings that they could lay their hands on in the wake of October. They shared belongings and they tried to repurpose the space that they had to make it more collective, to make it more in keeping with the comradely sensibilities that they thought they had to promote. Starting out as something of a pastime among a handful of student activists between 1918 and 1920, the urban household commune would become a meme across the 1920s. That is, an imitable, revolutionary creation seen to carry the essential characteristics of socialism. That is, a unit, an idea, a behaviour that helps to pass on certain cultural understandings from person to person through mimicry and repetition. So the idea of making these communes, of helping others make their own communes, is perpetuating itself across the 20s. The Communist Youth League, aka the Komsomol, helped to facilitate such growth insofar as this was an organ keen to encourage reports on activism, keen to do so in the years immediately following 1917, when Komsomol and party didn't think that they had mobilised the necessary forces to continue the revolution. And they therefore were ready to co-opt or to codify movements from below if they thought they had legs. As the youth press reported on these early creations, mainly from 1919 onwards, more began to experiment with this form of living, often in haphazard ways, and the press then conducted a number of studies of these groups. These studies suggest that from a handful, maybe a few hundred people attached to these communes in central Petrograd, they grew in number with thousands participating in such ways of living through the early 1920s. And then Komsomolskaya Pravda, the main press organ of Komsomol, suggested that up to 50,000 activists were attached to a commune or living in communes across Central European Russia by 1928-29. So this becomes a larger movement by that point. This figure would actually grow exponentially as these groups became tied to the first 5-year plan. and a renewed push for collectivism and for collective work practices, mainly from 1929 to 31. But today, I just want to remain on the growth of the commune as a meme, as a trend, if you will. I want to remain focused on the social and cultural history that comprises the pursuit of a socialist lifestyle, and obviously fits in very well with the lecture series on social histories. I want to offer a critical assessment, yes. Indeed, the urban communes should carry a warning: be careful what you wish for. They didn't necessarily offer an opposition to the statist visions that would create the 1930s. That's not to say that they are necessarily Stalinist, but they didn't offer an anti-Bolshevik cause. But I also want to show how their optimism and the optimism of revolution manifested. And I want to put us in touch with the emotional energy of 1917, as seen through the eyes of these significant numbers of radicals. This doesn't explain, their story doesn't explain the whole of the Russian Revolution, but it does offer a tale of revolutionary aspiration, appropriation, and participation at the ground level. And I think that's precisely what the lecture series is all about. Now, just to build some context here, we are perhaps more familiar with the idea of grand revolutionary housing projects in the form of grand architectural designs, such as the design that Brendan put together on the leaflet and this image here. This is Lavrov's housing commune model from 1928. It is effectively what the Russians would refer to as paper architecture, i.e. it never made its way from the page to reality, mainly due to a lack of resources. But the ambition of these projects would be that they would act as microcosms of communism, microcosms of socialism, where you would live the socialist lifestyle, create a socialist community, which would then set an example for the rest of society. The most famous example, which actually was built, is Ginsberg's Narkomfilm, built between 1928 and 1930. Built using the principles of the social condenser. That is effectively this idea that you can teach those living inside it to be more socially conscious and more socialist by giving them more communal lifestyle, giving them a more communal lifestyle. So for instance, the building attached to this, the larger building here, is where there would be a communal canteen. So you would all eat together and it would develop your collective socialist consciousness as you would eat together. The idea in that building as well is that there are some spaces that are technically more bourgeois, with some private kitchens and some private accommodation. And then as you became more socialist, you would move to those parts of the building that had less privacy, and you would gain in your socialist consciousness. So it is a stepping stone to socialism. Again, a grand architectural vision, a very bold ambition. But these designs weren't formed in a vacuum. Indeed, living cheek by jowl was not new to Russia, not new at all. For centuries, a limited and inefficient agrarian economy had tied the majority of Russians to the land, and had tied them to communities where they had to live in closer proximity than they might otherwise have chosen. In the long term, this ultimately created peasant communities who often would apparently share and divvy up their land on a collective principle. Now, industrialization and modernization at the end of the 19th century did little to change this, with urban migrants and seasonal workers importing the shared habits of the village into the city, bringing collective bargaining, bringing a shared, by sharing the living spaces at the common expense, forming what became known in Russia as the artel or the arteli. These are kind of proto trade union type organisations, but not quite as organised as that. Inspired by these apparently deeply ingrained community structures, these collective ways of living in Russia, and the sheer resilience apparently of their countrymen, a growing number of intellectuals across the 19th century, of varying political persuasions I should add, so from people such as the father of socialism in Russia, Herzen to the dark and moody conservative Dostoevsky, all observed and celebrated a sense of brotherhood and collective unity within Russians. This was seen to be something within their national identity. This is a period when many countries are seeking to celebrate or promote what their national identity is about. Russia celebrates its brotherhood, its common bond. It was suggested that Russia's harsh and sparsely populated land encouraged cooperative forms of survival, in contrast to the gladiatorial competition of the West and social Darwinism, where all were pitted against all. The anarchist Petr Kropotkin famously disputed Darwin's emphasis on competition in evolution, suggesting that the emphasis should be more on cooperation. He would put forward the idea of how the bumblebee and the flower evolved together, for instance. So you have key intellectual figures talking about an innate cooperation within the Russian people. Now, a famous Russian author and thinker, Nikolai Chernyshevsky, wrote his book, What is to be Done, in 1863. This became what was known as the Handbook of Radicalism. It had a number of characters that would inspire revolutionaries for years to come, including Rakhmatov, who is this kind of aesthetic, simple, dogmatic figure that apparently Lenin based much of his character on. Indeed, John Reed, the famous American writer and journalist, upon meeting Lenin, said that he was an unimpressive idol. He was meant to be unimpressive. He was an aesthetic character, simple in his manner. That was an idea that he was trying to cultivate out of Chernyshevsky's novel. But in this novel also there's a cast of other young people, new people, as Chernyshevsky called them, that were promoting new morals, new habits, and they happened to live in what he called a common apartment, perhaps the very first commune, I would put it. So you have different elements of the intellectual elite in Russia celebrating this collective ideal. And the Bolsheviks, if we can fast forward to 1917, the Bolsheviks were very much influenced by this cultural and intellectual preoccupation. This preoccupation with collectivism and collective organization. The October Revolution initiated a renewed and much radicalized impetus for collective living. Soviet agitation presented an image of a new comradely society in which the individual I would be replaced by the collective we. Collective housing, collective dining, collective recreation were understood as transformative activities and spaces where people could mold a new type of person and a new civilization. So collectivism and Marxism combined to create the ideal picture of a Soviet society. Incorporating notions of class warfare, collectivist pursuit at home and collegial practices at work were presented as the antithesis to a bourgeois individualism. For those young idealists eager to throw their lot in the revolution, discussions and debates about socialism instinctively drew on this long-standing but newly energized discourse on collectivism. Collectivism provided the most immediate picture of the new world, of the new dawn that was coming, and the promises of 1917. But the collective, the small, concentrated brotherly unit, also provided the means of achieving it. Just to mention this picture I put up behind me, this is Brodsky's famous image of Lenin at the Smolny Institute. Just another example of Lenin in a simple, plain, aesthetic environment. He is not a fussy man. He's pure and untainted by bourgeois decoration. Again, something that would be linked to their understanding of collectivism. So let's take a look at some of these young idealists and how they formed the communes and how they interpreted the readings that I've suggested that they were interpreting. More on the images behind me in a second. But if you were to visit Petrograd in the winter of 1919, 1920, and take a walk through the northern outskirts of the city, away from the neoclassical grandeur of Nevsky Prospect, you would find 3 Polytechnic students who had just declared the formation of a self-styled commune within the confines of a simple dormitory room, central dormitory room, like perhaps one's very near by us here in London. In the corner sat a small tin or a common pot, just an example of what a common pot of money would look like from a different commune from a later period, but there is an image up on the screen. Alongside this common pot there's a notice board, which was used to display notices quite obviously, but also to put up the various chores that each member was expected to take that day. Look beyond the humble nature of this little abode with its exposed wooden floor and drafty windows, and you soon notice that these young activists are in the process of establishing a system of pooled resources and shared duties. And they would also effectively share their underwear, share their clothes, share their money, and share the space in which they lived. As a gesture of equality, linen, socks, underwear are provided at the common expense, whilst household tasks, including meal preparation, which is usually limited to bread, potatoes, soup and porridge at this stage, are undertaken by all cohabitants. One of these communals, as they call themselves, was a woman, so there was an element of a sexual revolution and a gendered revolution in place here as well. In the centre of the room, a small table serves as a place where collective meals and group study and group meetings and political discussions can take place. Sometimes fellow students and neighbours are invited in to debate around this table, and on such occasions the beds are pushed up against the wall to provide the extra space and seating needed. The peaceable sharing of this space and this multi-purpose environment seem to be equated with the socialist practice of mutual cooperation and rational management. Here, these students embrace the key tenet of Marxism, from each according to his ability, from each according to his needs. But in their form and their premise, they also drew on the idealized vision of a Russian collectivism. This and other groups subsequently made reference to the collective organization that became the RTL, as I've mentioned, and even made mention of the infamous student debating circles of pre-1917 Russia, the Krushki as they were called, where radical students would get together and to debate the ideas of their age. They also drew parallels between themselves and the new people that populated the work of Chernyshevsky. They strived to be the exemplary people that Chernyshevsky would said that would build a collective world. One commune group subsequently tried to replicate the austere and aesthetic eating habits of Rachmaninoff in the novel, a way of rejecting their understanding of fancy or fine dining. Through collected acts such as this, I would argue more so than the official campaigns, I would argue more so than trying to read Das Kapital, Marxist visions came to life for these activists and these students. Socialist ideology gained a local traction. And again, just to refer to this picture in the centre here, this isn't the commune I've been referring to, this is from a later period, but here you have a commune group gathered together, looking, again, starry-eyed and idealistic. The student dormitories of Petrograd are an appropriate place for us to hang around for a moment, this being a key space where the communes established themselves. Indeed, for when Ali Yanbolat and Stepan Balyezin, two young whippersnappers, turned up to university circa 1923, the student commune had become something of an established entity by all accounts. Not least because of the publication of a number of articles that would become Trotsky's Problems of Everyday Life. And with these publications, a greater focus on a cultural revolution came to the fore, including the nature of domestic life and social habits. The guiding principle of these publications was held in the phrase, "Not by politics alone does man thrive," i.e. you have to change the culture, you can't just change the governing administrative system. Jan Bolat, gaining entry into what was by that time the Leningrad State Electoral Technical Institute, LETI for short. He became embroiled in long conversations about collectivism, internationalism, the imperialist war, global revolution, and he was introduced to an idea that he said would change the rest of his educational experience, the Student Commune. He saw groups coming together to share their possessions, putting their stipends and earnings into a common pot, and invoking the reformation of domestic norms. Communes, he noticed, would eat, sleep, drink and play together as a cohesive unit. Again, a collective, a brotherly bond. Among other things, they undertook collective trips to the theatre and the cinema, and to museums, he noted. They put themselves forward as cultural exemplars. Jan Ballat would ultimately take custody of a dormitory room with a few friends and enact his own strict code of shared living and revolutionary habits. He took literally the press releases that called for young activists and readers to do away with the bourgeois and be collective. As well as promoting a collective lifestyle, they rejected symbols of the old order, such as muslin curtains and excessive ornamentation, things that trap dust, things that literally trapped the past. This, in a way, was preempting the 1928 Communal campaign against bric-a-brac, against excessive ornamentation. They're doing this circa 23-24. Baljessen would similarly enter what became the Hudson University as an idealist. But he was also disappointed by what he found. As he put it, he was disappointed by the poorly organised Communal representation there. For him, the Commune became a way of making up for their shortfalls. He was shocked to discover that there were still people in his university environment that were hostile, God forbid, to the Bolshevik cause, and that some professors and university staff remained deeply suspicious of their new students. To give some context here, there were a number of worker faculties being built from 1919, which were kind of a stepping stone to get workers and for people from working class families into the university environment. So there was a new class coming into the university environment. Baljessen recalled the dismissive remarks of one of his anatomy professors. "You're all the same, you workers. You don't understand the school of science. I wonder, do you even need it?" So here he is, kind of confronted by these apparently wrong-thinking professors, and he's quite dismayed by this. And during the 1924 flood of Leningrad, he and some friends would help form a relief team. They saw themselves as good socialists, good young Samaritans, if you will. Although he did admit that this relief team did help themselves to any of the beer and spirits that they found on the salvage missions down the basements of Nevsky Prospect, so they weren't quite the goody two-shoes that they thought they were. This relief team became the basis of the commune that Baljessen set up. He was also convinced. He also convinced a team of young women students to come and join him in this commune and in this effort. He persuaded what was called at the time a female poster army, that is, a bunch of young women activists that were putting together slogans to be put up across the university. And here's a picture of them here, Baljessen in the centre. The chap you might be able to make out to the far right with the star on is apparently a Communal representative, whilst the rest of the women formed the Women's Poster Army. And here they are in the university promoting the socialist cause because they don't think the Communal are doing enough. So he gets these people on side. They seem like the right sort. In their most basic form then, the Student Commune sought to develop comradely and cooperative forms of residence within the student dormitories. But they were fundamentally concerned about the life of the university as a whole. They increasingly began to promote the idea of domestic renovation and the restructuring of the way of life, or byt in Russian, within the dormitory. Commune groups cast aspersions not only on the state of the dormitory, but on the disorder of their peers and student life in general. And here, to your far right, you have a self-drawn caricature from one of these communards, presenting himself here as quite an earnest figure, and they were probably quite earnest figures, demanding socialist change of their university environments. And here, towards the bottom, is a notice board where much of the student literature and young consommable literature would be displayed within the dormitories or within the university setting. The idea of this cultural revolution then, this idea of a domestic reformation of dormitory life, was given further credence by the introduction of the first cultural inspection teams in the early 1920s. So these were teams that eventually came to report on the living conditions of the dormitories. They came to report for the consommable. But in these early years, they formed somewhat more haphazardly, and they included some commune groups amongst their organisers. They would go around and inspect each room maybe once a month, and they would grade them. And they would end up naming and shaming the worst and celebrating the best. Eventually, these reports started to be reported in the student press and in the student newspapers. And one of the funniest ones I found was the naming and shaming of room number 202, if I remember correctly, because on the inspection outside the front door of the dormitory room, they found 184 empty bottles of alcohol. So they clearly weren't partaking in a good socialist lifestyle. Equally, these reports would celebrate the best performers. In fact, there was also another report, I remember now, it's coming back to me, where they said, we walked into the room and we couldn't tell the difference between the floor and the table, such was the dust and disorder. So they were very keen to name and shame. One newspaper posted a question to the most persistent bad performers, actually, showing some elements of a gendered vision here. They put it like this: if a naive girl appeared from the country, what would you offer her but cigarette butts and empty bottles? Again, the idea was to stop partying and be exemplary socialists. The Herzen student newspaper also reveals in great detail that the student commune could take multiple forms. The paper reported on a number of room communes, that is, single rooms, where somewhere between 3 and 6 members would occupy the room and try to live together collectively. It also suggested that there were perhaps hundreds of students in Petrograd living in this manner as you enter the beginning of the 20s. And those that survived this initial burst of enthusiasm apparently ended up trying to spread across entire dormitory floors to become floor communes, as they were prosaically called. And some had the ambition, although I haven't yet come across anyone that actually managed to do this, had the ambition to take over the entire damn dormitory, to call themselves dormitory communes, or общежития коммуны in Russian. Balyazin was one of those communards that eyed up expansion. He eyed up the formation of something more akin to a modern facility, a modern mechanism to advance socialist living. He called his commune the Everyday Housing Commune, and that became known by the catchy acronym JBK. Extending across a couple of rooms initially, then acquiring a residence from an old professor, acquiring basically an apartment, before then actually returning back to a dormitory where they took over an entire floor of the dormitory by 27-28. This commune, JBK, apparently peaked at just over 100 members by this point. So this becomes something quite different to those smaller groups. They repurposed the space that was made available to them to create a more collective facility. And here is a picture of some of the activities that they try to undertake. They have a kind of recreation space towards the bottom. They have collective eating facilities and studying facilities at the top. And of course, you can see towards the middle, they're always reading. They're always enlightening themselves and reading socialist propaganda literature. Like many other student communes around this time, they also started to discuss and experiment with the principle of what was called, another catchy Russian name for you here, the Scientific Organization of Labor, which went by the acronym NOT. NOT was a system of time discipline and daily regulation very much influenced by the industrial efficiency theories of the American engineer and manufacturing consultant Frederick Winslow Taylor. But while Taylor extended the clocking in and the timesheet of the Victorian Wedgwood factory, pursuing an invasive system that regulated employees like machine parts, the variation that appeared in the Soviet Union presented a far more complete picture of human management. It encompassed the rationalization of leisure time, entertainment, domestic life, and social duty. So here you actually have, from a different commune, if I'm being honest, but an example of a Taylorist timetable that this commune would have to follow. It simply says that when they're having breakfast, when they are studying at university, when they're dedicating some time to various activities, but there's a note at the end to clearly one student who wasn't quite keeping up with it. It reads, Ilya, don't be late. So they're trying to live a disciplined lifestyle in this manner. So yes, in these communes and in this commune, this Taylorist system manifested itself in the form of duty laws, allocating time spent, and in these kind of pseudo-scientific attempts to judge or rationalize your time spent. Each member within Balyezin's JBK commune, for example, was asked at one period to write a diary entry. And the idea was that they would monitor how they spent their time in order to perfect their time in the future. And again, perhaps showing some kind of gendered blurring or gendered vision. There was one complaint in the documents I read where they said the women forgot to do it on the weekend. Women are always more susceptible to criticism, and that wasn't that different at this point in time. They also apparently wrote what sound like awful things, open and frank letters to one another, which would then be displayed on the commune wall in a public facility. This was meant to ensure that they all nudged each other into line. They believed that they all had a duty to be better socialists, to be exemplars, the exemplars necessary to promote socialism in the university. And by the late 1920s, Balyezin convinced the Communal to study his JBK next to what he called a mere ordinary dormitory. And the result, the actual conclusion of a Communal study, in one line reads, "The results are all too obvious," by which they meant the commune was better, they performed better, the facilities were better, they better read better, they studied better, they were cleanlier, they were more modern in that sense. But still there was no funding forthcoming. This wasn't a big enough initiative to really take the Communal's interest at this point. So again, just want to put this all in context rather than just giving you random stories of these idealists and what they're doing. It's important to remember that the new economic policy, the NEP, is what actually helped to make this cultural revolution and these engagements with an attempted cultural revolution. Communes during the NEP, which is circa 1921 to 27, 28, they became like a badge of honour. They are a means of expressing and displaying one's revolutionary identity. So implemented in 1921, as a means of stabilising the economy and the country, NEP was a revolutionary compromise. Okay? It was a compromise in the economic sphere. It brought back elements of marketeering, it brought back profiteering, it brought back rent and diminished rent control. But compromise in the economic sphere didn't mean compromise in all spheres. Many Communal members reacted to the return of bourgeois symbols, the return of fine dining, the raffish behaviour and pastime of horse racing, profiteering and the dreaded net man, by promoting, again, a cultural revolution. They rallied against what they saw as almost a kind of sickly netification of society, a return of these bourgeois ways. And this is not to defend or to legitimise what comes next, but to some extent, this body of activists provide the social base that facilitated Stalin's push for the end of NEP at the end of the 1920s. There were some groups that wanted to end this compromise. The Commune and this cultural revolution therefore provided a means of developing revolution both within oneself and one's environment. It was an easily accessible means of revolutionary participation in this sense. And this brings me back to the Mokrinsky Lane Commune.
Andy,
What-
how are you doing for time?
Come to the end.
Okay.
What brought this group together? In 1924, up a rickety old staircase on McClinsky Lane, 5 young men and 5 young women agreed to come together in this commune. With 2 bedrooms, a living room, which they called optimistically the club, in honour of the working men's clubs being built at the time, they looked to create socialism. It all started with a letter sent from one communard to a friend saying that he couldn't bear living with his parents after university ends. Why don't we move our collective ideals from the university into general society, i.e. why don't we gain an apartment and live in this manner again? So collective experiences of the university extended to society. They would look to present themselves as the opposite of this guy in the corner, which is a drunken hooligan. You know, there's a moral panic that drunkenness is taking hold of the youth in the middle of the 20s, and they are saying that they are developing themselves as an opposite to this. As you can see in the pictures here, they also share the housework and the ironing, although the women in the commune apparently put it to the vote at some stage that the men shouldn't be allowed to iron because they can't iron, they can merely burn and crush the sheets. But ironing is actually a very important thing to do at this point. It kills the lice that cause typhus, so it's more than just creating a nice environment. There was a medical reason to do it as well. They established also a number of committees. They established a housekeeping committee, a finance committee, a political committee, and a cultural committee where they could discuss these various ideas. Now, if you think about it, there's only 10 people in this commune, so each committee is really only 2 to 3 people. So it's not really a committee. But what they're doing is they're speaking the language of modernity. They're speaking the language of modern organisations. So again, it's their idea of what a modern society should be. It's rational, it's scientific, it's not haphazard, it's not accidental, it's not like the past. There were a number of occasions where they would also fall out. So one of the committee meetings, Nina, one of the communards, got annoyed when her suggestion that they should buy coats with their latest pot of money was put down. She shouted to the opposing forces, "You must see, fatheads, that we can't be in the winter without a coat." But this apparently didn't go down very well. So just to move to a conclusion. By 1926, when even the upper echelons of the Consommel were speaking of the potential example of these communes, these groups can be seen as part of a mounting antithesis to the revolutionary perversions of NEP. Along the way, it's clear that the communes and communards display all the fragilities that you would expect of those that wanted to see tomorrow today. Indeed, I've hardly touched upon the number of failed communes and their propensity to bicker. But at the same time, it seems that most of the determined communards paused and surveyed their existence across the 20s, and they saw the mistakes and shortcomings as further proof of the need for their existence and their continued struggle. And what their story tells us, I think, is that youth can be seen as a constituency for the revolution of everyday life and cultural revolution in this period. The importance of the socialist lifestyle was nurtured among such youths, helping to establish what was seen as cultured in the Soviet context. The promise of revolution can be seen through them to both frame and fire the imagination, which links to one of the previous speakers in this lecture series, Steve Smith, who says that identity, and I think we can talk about ideas as well here, that identity and ideas can develop along axes other than that intended by the state. And I think that's what's happening with these commune groups. The state doesn't intend these groups to come about. We also see these groups in dialogue with the revolution, helping certain ideas to gain traction at the local level, certainly within the institutions of higher education. They were involved in a cyclical relationship also with the youth press. They were enacting the collectivist ideals that they read in the press, and they then themselves got reported on and became part of the story. So they were engaged in this dialogue. But at the same time, thinking about how they've come out of Chernyshevsky's novels, how they are the children of Chernyshevsky, I think that we can see the makeup of Soviet socialism within them. We can start to see what's Russian in all of this. And if we are to comply with the multiple modernities conception of the modern world, that is, the idea that modernity shouldn't just mean a Eurocentric Western vision or a Western pattern, then I think the urban communes can be seen not as a Western construct, not as something prescribed by Marx, but as something Russian. Just as the architecture of Ginsberg and the Vesnin brothers were no mere interpretation of Le Corbusier, and just as the kinetic shapes of Natalia Goncharova and Kazimir Malevich and the early futurist paintings were no mere homage to Pablo Picasso. They were their own, they were Russian visions of these modern ideas. All in all, the communes can be said, I think, can be seen, I think, to try to make the change they wanted to see in the world, to change the world, to make the world what they wanted it to be. Or as Chernyshevsky would put it, to strive for it, to work for it, to bring it nearer, to make the promise of revolution a reality. Thank you.